Number 74,
Part 3. Thanks for joining us, and we are the Wildflowers.
Yeah.
We are still.
And part 3 is our topic, and the topic is my topic today.
Yes, it is.
So can I just do it?
Johnny,
Yeah, go for it.
Because I know
No,
we're trying to keep my notes time. So my topic is about a woman that I never heard about before, and I don't think any of you ladies heard about her before.
No.
Her name is Madame Restell. R-E-S-T-E-L-L.
Is it Madame or Madame?
Is she
I
French?
don't know.
Okay.
Well, that's the thing. Most people believe she was French.
Oh,
Okay.
So
there
maybe
we go.
if it is, if they believed she was French, would it be Madame?
Probably.
Yes.
Okay, so I was in Barnes & Noble, the one in Northport, I think it was, or Northport. It recently closed down, and they were having a huge fire sale where
wow.
everything was like 75%, 80% off. So I got a lot of books. And this was one of the books I saw on a shelf, and I said, let me grab this one. Okay, let me read you the full title, because it caught my eye.
Okay.
This just came out, by the way, it's 2023. It's by Jennifer Wright with a W, W-R-I-G-H-T, and it's by Hachette Books, which I know.
Hachette.
Okay, Hachette. Madame Restell, the life, death, and resurrection of old New York's most fabulous, fearless, and infamous abortionist. So we're from New York, and I said, how do I not know about this woman? So much that this woman wrote this very lengthy book with a lot of references. In case I don't say it before, but she is very well cited throughout the book too. So it's a nonfiction book. So it took me a longer period to read through because there's a lot to delve through. All right. And this is why I thought it's going to be long, but I just can't rush through it. So I'm sorry. Okay. This is something.
Dinner.
I know. Okay.
No, it's fine.
And it's timely because today Americans, this is from her book, are entering a new age of Comstockery. Do you know what Comstockery is? It stems from a man called Andrew Comstock, who I will tell you about a little bit later, but he was the one who started passing the Comstock Act and Comstock laws. The Comstock Act was where you could not mail lewd, lascivious, or pornographic material through the mail. That he started that, and then it morphed from there. Okay, where if women do not want to be mothers, they will be made to be. Madame Restell will not be there to assist women. In fact, in areas where abortion is restricted, it's almost certain that a great many less effective people will offer their services. And just as Horatio Storer, we could talk about them later, found that women will do dangerous things to induce their own abortions, so will we. You know, it doesn't change.
No, it's not going to change.
No,
they're not going to stop women from having an abortion.
Absolutely not. So imagining that everyone will know about mifepristone, which is in the news nowadays, and misoprostol, or have access to them, is a fantasy. If this frightens you, this book was written in 2022, by the way, so but it came out in 2023. If this frightens you, if it fills you with dread, as it does for me, that your daughters will grow up with fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers had, and that the use of their bodies will be dictated by legislators who have never met them, then please remind them of history. By and large, Americans don't like learning history. They like learning propaganda. How true is that, right? They enjoy stories that are exclusively about how America is great and always has been. But do not let your children believe in a fictitious, rosy version of the past where every woman was happily a mother. Tell them the true history of this country where abortion has always been commonly practiced. And tell them your own history, like you did the last podcast. Your own history is important. It's powerful. My greatest fear is that abortion rights will be taken away in America. That's horrible, but that's a reality for many people and has always been for some time. It's that we will stop being angry about it.
So she wrote this before it actually happened.
No, she wrote this after Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Okay.
But I'm sure it prompted her to write, but you know, before
and the abortion, for the abortion pills,
is all of that. Okay, so who is she? Who is Madame Restell? Well, she was born in 1811, not in France, but in England. Her real name was Anne Trow, T-R-O-W, and she was a regular person. She was a seamstress by trade. Okay. But now where is this? The backdrop is she ends up coming to New York City around the mid 1800s. So this is the backdrop of where the story takes place. All right. So the sources estimate that around the mid 1800s, around 1850, the abortion rate was 20% of pregnancies at that time ended up in abortion.
Oh, wow.
20%.
That's high. That is high.
Yes. And at that same time, what else is there in common? About 30.
And that's in the
1850s.
Okay.
So about 30,000 homeless children existed. But there's a distinction between homeless children. You had orphans, and you had, which orphans were basically who lost both parents.
Right.
Right.
They were pretty much raised in reputable homes, respectable homes, but they had lost both parents. You may remember Hamilton, right? Where the first orphanage was started by Hamilton's widow. That did not include foundlings, however. Foundlings are different. Foundlings were those children abandoned immediately after birth. Orphanages did not admit foundlings.
Really?
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Okay, so it's interesting. So what happened to foundlings? They were abandoned at doorsteps, street corners, or put in almshouses, which were not really very well, and 90% of foundlings died.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so those people who ended up not having abortions, they would have these babies
That they
who couldn't take care of, and 90% of them died.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pay attention, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Madame Restell, she was married twice. Her first husband was named Henry. He was a tailor, but he was an alcoholic. Okay, they had a daughter together named Caroline, and when she was a toddler, her husband died, not of alcoholism, of something else. He died of typhoid fever. So Anne was 21, recently widowed, with a toddler. Okay, in New York City, and all of her family is in England. And so what are the options for her? The most prominent option is prostitution, right? Or you go work in a factory, but who's going to mind your baby? That's when opium people were drugging their babies and all of this. That wasn't enough. She's a strong woman from what I learned. I don't know if, opinionated, not very female-minded either. She was for herself, I would say, but had good intentions. And that wasn't going to be an option for her, either one of those. So she was a networker in a way, and she ended up, she ended up networking with her neighbor named Dr. William Evans, who was a pill compounder, made pills. And she learned the trade very quickly, and she made her own version of abortive pills and started selling them for $1 a packet. And she was so successful because she advertised in local newspapers that she sold them in not only New York City but also Boston and Philadelphia. And she ended up setting a clinic and advertised for this as well in New York City.
That's crazy.
That became wildly successful. And nobody to this day can point to any known casualties or deaths attributed to Madame Restell having an abortion. She had repeat customers, but she had customers, not only were they, people assume that they're like prostitutes or no, she had senators, wives, girlfriends, lawyers, everyone.
Were all of them
clientele.
medical abortions, or she performed regular
Great
abortions?
question. No, she offered the pills if they wanted. Sometimes they would come to her afterwards when it was too late for the pills to work, so she would do medical abortions, or she would also offer in her clinic homes where people could, and she would do midwifery, where they could do the baby.
Right.
She didn't pressure them to have either one. That was their choice.
Right.
But she would assist them, and unlike doctors or clinics, she took care of the woman. So they had a bedroom, and she waited on them and took care of them and would sit by their bedside through the night to make sure that they weren't feverish, to make sure she attended to them and gave them good food and good care for weeks.
Oh, wow.
After the procedure.
Well, that's why she had a good survival rate.
That is exactly why she had a good survival rate, one of the best ones. So, but one of the mysteries with this woman is, where did she learn this from? Because she was a seamstress by trade. Before she was in between being a seamstress and then being married, she worked as a servant. You know, so it's not really known about, but she did lie. She lied about her training. So in her publication, she said she was from France. She learned the craft in medical, are the best medical doctors from France. And this was before the internet. You can't really research anybody back then. But she didn't. But she was well read. She read a lot, and she did work for a butcher in her youth. So some people are trying to say maybe that's some sort of connection, but more likely than not, it's this Dr. Evans who taught her the pill making, who probably also taught her a lot about the craft. But that doesn't mean her life wasn't without problems. She was arrested many, many times.
For aborting?
Yes, or attempting to. The first one involved this woman named Ann Dole, was a patient who bought pills. And she got a bit nervous after she bought the pills and showed them to her doctor. Just wanted to make sure they were safe to take. And it was the doctor, not the patient, who turned her in, right? But the patient refused to testify, right? She didn't take the pills because she got bullied into not taking them and all that. And what happened? She ended up dying in childbirth because of an infection during childbirth. And so she didn't, anyway, so that's what happened there. After her husband died, she did marry another man named Charles Lohman in 1835, who was a printer. He apparently was a very supportive type of a man as well. They lived at 148 Greenwich Street in New York City. Nice area, right? And that's kind of where she also worked out of a little bit too. And there was this recently studied, here's another my notes are in not order, but I'm just going to go through. But in 2020 there was a study done, it's all sourced here if you want to look at that. 77% of married fertile women in America use contraceptives to this day. Politicians, that 77% of married people who are fertile are using contraceptives. So what are we doing here, wasting our time attacking it at this point? Okay, she was arrested a second time after a patient called Ann Purdy. She ended up dying, but of consumption. Consumption is tuberculosis, right? But they couldn't figure out what was going on. After she was bloodlet, she came down with an illness months after she had a miscarriage through the pills, and they bloodletted her. They did traditional doctor did all these other sort of procedures. They cupped her, they put leeches on her. All they still couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. So they asked her, "What else have you done?" And they got it out of her that a few months before she had a miscarriage. Oh, that's what's wrong with you. So they had Madame Restell arrested for manslaughter, and she spent 2 months in the Tombs in New York City for this. Her trial was July 14th, 1841. The testimony given by the victim, she tried, basically what happened was the woman tried to get her money back from Madame Restell. She only paid $1 to her. She felt so bad.
$1 was a lot of money back then.
And she wouldn't give back because her money was, she was a very wealthy woman because of it, and that ended up, she turned her in there too. And that's how she got turned in. She was convicted, but it was overturned on an appeal. Turned out. So there you are.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, it was very interesting how everything worked out. She was a wealthy woman, a beautiful woman. The newspaper articles coverage at the time couldn't lay off how gorgeous this woman was.
Yeah.
And for the time, she was super wealthy. She had 5, 6, 7 carriages carried by horses of color coordinated horses, her stables, and she reveled in it. Diamonds and jewelry. She dressed herself against it, which is not the norm for women at the time, right? And remember, this is still a little
her own money too.
And, I was just going to say, because this is the time of coverture. Do you remember the term coverture that I talked about back then when we were talking about Susan B. Anthony, where any property a woman held at the time was owned by your husband. She was like, no, this is mine, and I'm showing it off, and I'm earning it. Her third lawsuit was brought after a woman named Mary Applegate, claiming that she stole her baby. Mary Applegate got impregnated by a wealthy lover who had promised her to be married, but of course that how that works out. They never followed through. So she came to her, gave birth. Madame Restell tried to talk her out of it and said, give the baby up for adoption because she was too far along for an abortion. You're going to be a single mother. We know what it's going to happen. What if your baby's a daughter? You knew what this was all going to end. She refused, and then Madame Restell said, your husband wrote to me and said he will pay a wet nurse to take care of this baby while you recover. And so she agreed to that, and Madame Restell gave the baby to a wet nurse. The woman went back, got jilted by the man. She came back to find out the address for the woman. Madame Restell pretended like she didn't know anything of it. So she was in the public eye, brought up like, you kidnapped this baby.
The address of the man?
Of the address of the woman, of the couple who took the baby, the wet nurse.
Oh, okay.
To this day, we don't know what happened to this baby. Now, some speculate, largely because based on notes and letters, that the woman's father paid Madame Restell to send the baby to the Midwest. Why the Midwest? Well, because many adopted children in the 1850s were adopted for free labor in the Midwest. And so children as young as the age of 1 year old could be bonded to a family as a servant until they were the age of 18 through adoption.
Wow.
And orphans and foundlings those foundlings that survived were sent to the Midwest for farm work, berry picking, and so forth. And so nobody really knows what happened to that baby.
They were like indentured servants.
Indentured servants. But I mean, so this is around 1850, but before 1845, abortion was really just a misdemeanor. That all kind of changed in 1845 when it became a felony, and you could get imprisonment in New York for 2 to 5 years. And at this time,
for having an abortion
or doing an abortion.
Okay.
But it was mostly doing
We're
an
going backwards, aren't we?
We are. We are.
Yeah.
And at this time, in 1845, about 1/4 of the pregnancies were aborted now. So even though it was a misdemeanor at the time before that, where you could be in jail for a year, it still was on the increase. We started at 20%, now we're going to 25%, right? But this just drove women underground. They didn't talk about it, or they went to people who didn't advertise, who weren't reputable for it, right?
Yeah, and that's why a lot of them died.
And what changed at that point is that now advertisers and publishers could get arrested for advertising this stuff too, right? We're going. We say this because
yesterday, we're going backwards.
This is why we're talking about it, and why I thought it was interesting. So, so what did she do? Well, she was a badass, and in 1847, her and her husband published something called the Married Woman's Private Medical Companion, and she published it. I love this woman. She talked about telling women how to track their periods, how to recognize early signs of pregnancy, ways to avoid pregnancy, and how to effect a miscarriage naturally with the natural herbs and stuff that you could find. She talked about STDs. Why was this important? Well, because at the time, doctors, if a woman came to them with an STD, evidence like gonorrhea
they were
or
probably
something else,
put in the asylum.
No, well, they didn't tell the women they had it. Why?
Oh, to protect the
man, because who was paying the doctor's bills? The
Right.
men, the husbands, and they didn't want to sully the men's name to the women. So the women would go and have these STDs and pass it along to their babies.
Oh my God.
Right?
Yeah.
How does this make you angry? It really should make us angry about this. I mean, when I was reading this, I go, this is our history, and we have to talk about it. The fourth case involving her was a patient named Maria Bodine. She was impregnated